Now, when you purchase your bow and you begin to shoot it and you're using it a whole bunch, it's always good to look over the bow and inspect everything. And one thing you want to really pay attention to is your cables. If there's ever any kind of, fraying or busted strands on the cables, you definitely want to change those. So today I'm going to show you how to change these cables in the most efficient way. Okay, so the first thing you want to do is remove the suppression system. And you can go over here to these set screws and back those out on both sides. Flip the bow over. And you can either take these all the way out or loosen them. I like to just keep them in so I don't lose any. And then once you have this thing sort of set to your liking, you can just wiggle this out here and take the whole thing off at once. But if you're not comfortable doing that, you can always go down in here and loosen up these screws that are in here and take the stirrups and take the string stop off too. So now once the suppression system's off, we're going to take the Allen wrench here and loosen the orange timing screw. And remember, this screw right here allows this cam here to float. That's important because you don't want one cam getting real tight and the other one not when you're taking weight on or off. So once the timing screw is loose, we're going to start taking weight off, and it's important to only go one turn at a time on each side. So make sure you go counterclockwise when taking weight off. You're going to want to do this until you see a good separation right here between your end cap and your riser. And so we'll go probably at least another 4 more turns each side to get this thing good and backed off to where we can press the limbs down and take the string off. And one way to tell if you've got enough weight backed off to take the string off is to feel these cables. And if they feel pretty loose, as you can see, that's pretty loose on both sides there. So that's a good indication that the bow is ready to for the string to come off. And you can either do it up here, like waist level with it, and pull down on it and take the string off. But with the Phoenix, they're a little bit heavier limbs, so I like to put it on the ground and press the limb down to take the string off. It's a little safer, and it's going to give you more leverage on it being lower than waist. So just put this down on the ground, and it's always good to have either a nice mat, and if you don't have a mat, you can also use the side of your shoe. But since we have a mat here, I'm going to go ahead and just use the mat. I'm going to kind of put my leg into the riser a little bit, press it down, and the string just comes right off. And I'll show you that again. So if you want to string it, same thing, like that. Take it off, pressure, it comes right off. So now that our string's off, and we're going to be replacing all the cables, so we're going to take this string and just set it to the side, and we don't want to lose our twists, so we're going to take the end loops and run a screwdriver through it so we make sure we get the same brace height when we put the string back on. So we're going to start by loosening these saddle screws to where the yoke cables run through. Back those out on both sides. And once you have that, then it's okay to go ahead and start stripping the cables. Just kind of make sure this wedge comes out there on those power cables. And here, and get these yokes out. And then it kind of looks like a mess here, and almost kind of confusing. But just, if you're ever confused, take a picture with your phone, or keep a picture, or refer to your manual to make sure you know how everything looks. And so I'm going to go ahead and stick this limb back in the end cap right here. And you always want to put a power cable on first, because it's darn near impossible to put the yoke cable on first and then the power cable. So always start with the power cable first. And so what I like to do is just tilt the bow upside like this, flip my cam up, and make sure this limb, this outboard limb, is brought back to you so the hinge is exposed. So you take the swedge end, put it to the inside of the cam, make sure the inside, not the outside, that's where the yoke goes. Power cable goes on the inside of the cam. You want to wrap it around here, run it through that hinge to where it fits nice and snug like. Make sure that thing is in there completely. And the other side, the inside of the cam, just like that. And at this point, I like to, with my thumbs, and my thumb and index finger here, I like to push down the cam to apply tension to it so it doesn't unravel. So from this point, I'll take the yoke cable and I'll start on the side towards me in the outside hole, take the swedge end, run it in like that and around the cam, through the saddle. Give that a little push down, make sure it doesn't pop out on you. Like this, and around the cam just like that. And I always like to give it about a half turn or so, maybe more depending on how much you can press down, but just to keep a little bit of tension on it so your cables don't come popping off when you go to put the string on. So as you can see, they're a little snug. They're not too snug, but you know, enough to where they're not going to pop off. So now we're going to go the other side, and same thing, you just want to start stripping your cables here. There we go. And go ahead and take your cables out of the saddle. And the same thing, I go ahead and seat the limb back in the end cap, get it positioned correctly, flip it up, make sure this limb is back towards you so the hinge is exposed. And make sure when you have this riser in this position to keep a little pressure right here with your forearm on the riser so you can control where it goes. You'll find that if you don't have enough pressure right here, you'll lose kind of balance and it'll be kind of a cluster trying to put this together. So just make sure you have good balance and tension right here on the limb to keep everything in place. So again, run the swedge in on the power cable to the inside of the cam, wrap it around through the hinge, make sure it's in there properly, and then to the inside of the cam again with the other swedge end, bring the cam down, pressure, make sure everything is seated properly. Take your yoke cable again to the outside, wrap it around through the saddle, give it a good push right there to make sure it doesn't pop out of the saddle, and on the back side, just like that. And then I'm going to go ahead and take about a turn, maybe two, just to have enough tensioning there to where they're not going to pop off. Once the cables are on and seated properly, it's time to put the string back on. And we're going to go back over here to where we had the screwdriver ran through, and you don't want to lose our twists. So keep both ends in your hand, make sure not to let them unravel, and hook the bottom one on first. And go ahead and get that in there where it ain't gonna pop off on you. Set the bow on the ground, widen this hole a little bit so we're not struggling to get it over the limb. And then just like before, apply a little pressure to your knee if you need to, and bring down with your arm here and run it right over the top of the limb, and it's strung. So now it's time to tiller the bow again, and so we want to make sure that everything is seated properly still, nothing's out of whack. And once we realize that everything's good, time to start adding weight. So we'll go one turn at a time, just like before. Make sure you are going clockwise to add weight. So once you get a few turns in it, it's always good to just look again to make sure all cables and your saddles and everything are still in the correct position and nothing's popped out, no swedges are sticking out of the cams, and we look pretty good. And if there's ever a swedge, you know, sitting maybe a little bit above the cam, you can take an Allen wrench and just push down the swedge like that and make sure it fits in there good, nice and snug. So once you have inspected it to where you know there's no cables or anything going wrong, you can start adding more weight. Still going one turn at a time. And when you're tightening these, you can watch it, the end caps here over the riser, and that can kind of help you make sure you get equal pressure on each side of the bow. And it looks like we're pretty close here. And you can also check the gap between your power limb and your outboard right here. And as you can see, they look pretty close. They might be a touch off. So we'll go ahead and try to tug on this thing and get it tillered. And so I always measure, and it's good to measure from the same point on each cam, because if you don't do that, you'll get an inconsistent timing. It looks like we're just a touch out. So I'm going to add weight to this side. Adding weight is going to bring the cam closer to the string. And so this one was measuring just a touch longer. So that's what I did there. I added weight to that to bring the cam forward. And that's just about perfect. I'm going to manipulate this cam just a little bit with my fingers there to get it precise. Yeah. And just like that, it's tillered. And you want to go ahead and tighten this down good and snug. Don't want that cam sliding when you draw the bow. And since we've taken the bow apart to replace cables, leave these saddle screws not, you know, way backed off, but backed off enough where the yoke can, you know, reposition itself. And the next thing to do is check the limb alignment. And you can get behind the limb like this and make sure that the string is coming off this limb perfect. It's sitting properly. So do to both sides here, tug on them a little bit. And once that looks pretty good, go ahead and draw it a time or two. And let it down as slow as you can. Make sure it's lined up, check them again. That one looks good. And that one looks good, running straight. And draw it one more time. And let it down slow. Then remeasure your tiller here to make sure that none of those cams have slid out of place. So it looks like we're pretty good on tiller. So now it's time to put the suppression back on the bow. It doesn't matter which suppression system here goes on either side. They're the exact same, they're identical. Unless you just have a preference, there's really, you know, no rhyme or reason to it. So once you get it in there where it looks good and our cables are up against these stirrups. And remember, you always want these cable brackets here to be on the string side of the cables. Okay, you don't want them on, say like this one, you wouldn't want it on this side, and this one you wouldn't want it on that side. So once you have all that done, suppression's in, go ahead and tighten your set screws here. Get them good and snug on both sides. Then we're just going to reciprocate that on the opposite side. Just like that. And remember to keep these on this side of the cables. And if there need to be any adjustment, you can always just loosen these up here. If they need to slide forward or back, that set screw just sits down in that hole. And see how you can slide it and manipulate that to fit the way you want it to. So we're going to push this up a little bit, tighten it down, slide this one forward just a touch to where it's touching, tighten it down, make sure our rod's sitting center, and tighten these riser or these set screws that are on the riser down. So once everything is in place, the bow's tillered and the limbs are sitting correctly and the suppression system on, you want to go ahead and tighten these saddle screws before shooting. That could be rather dangerous to you and the bow. And these don't need to be real tight, but just snug enough to where it keeps that yoke cable from sliding. And once that is tightened up, then the bow is ready to go. It's ready to shoot.